Oracle of Ages is one of the two Oracle games, the other being Oracle of Seasons. The two games have a lot of similarities. They both use the engine from Link's Awakening, so the core gameplay is similar. Most of the items in Ages were also present in Seasons. The notable new items are the seed shooter and the switch hook. The seed shooter allows you to aim and shoot seeds that bounce off walls. This allows you to hit switches around corners. The switch hook is a variant of the hook shot that allows you to swap places with enemies and items. The cane from A Link to the Past also returns and gets some good use in puzzles. Notably missing from Ages are the Roc's Cape, the Magnet Gloves, and the manually controlled boomerang. The main differences between the two games come from their focus. While Seasons was mostly focused on combat with some puzzles interspersed, Ages is fully focused on puzzles. The puzzles in Ages are complex and often have difficult solutions or require some precision to solve. While there is some combat to break up the puzzles, encounters are significantly easier, with far less enemies. The actual mechanics haven't changed from Seasons. With that in mind, I'm not going to spend too much time repeating things that I already mentioned in the previous video. Instead, I'm going to focus on the things that make Ages unique, as well as the linked features. After completing one of the Oracle games, you're given a code to start the second game with. This alters the story to continue on from the first game. While playing the linked game, you'll be given secrets by NPCs which direct you to other NPCs in the first game. Telling these secrets to the correct NPC will give you a code to enter back into the second game for a reward. Jumping between the two games is a novel concept, and while it does happen a few times, I never found it to get too tedious. It's worth noting that I played on an emulator, so switching between games took just a few button presses. On an actual Game Boy it would take longer. The biggest reward is the Master Sword. This considerably raises your power level and allows you to trivialise the game. Ages already didn't have a lot of difficult combat, and with the Master Sword you can one-shot most enemies. Two items are only available through these linked sequences, the Bombchus and Bigoron's Sword. Bigoron's Sword is a powerful sword that takes up both hands, and Bombchus are bombs that travel in a straight line before exploding. These items both felt a bit redundant, and I struggled to find a good use for them. Rings can be shared between the two games, which allows you to get access to powerful rings like the Heart Ring earlier than normal. This does present the issue that most of the rings I found in Ages were useless, since I already had the best rings from Seasons. In addition to items and upgrades, there are some bigger pieces of content unlocked by linking the two games. The first is the Hero's Cave, an optional mini-dungeon filled with challenging puzzles. The puzzles in the dungeon are cryptic and often require precise timing. It's a great test of mastery over the mechanics. Unfortunately, the rewards for this cave aren't notable. I wish they'd tied the Master Sword to completion of the Hero's Cave instead of it being a reward from a secret. The most notable addition in the linked game is a new final boss. After defeating the final boss of Ages, you're warped to a new area where you fight Twin Rover and Ganon. Although neither of these bosses are too challenging, having to fight the two back to back without healing adds to the difficulty. The fight against Ganon feels suitably epic, especially since he hasn't truly been present in the past few games. The extra boss provides satisfying closure on the Oracle series. The unique mechanic in Oracle of Ages is time travel. There are two versions of the overworld, one in the past and one in the present. At first, you can only time travel at certain spots, but eventually you gain the ability to time travel freely. You'll have to move between the two versions of the world to access new areas. Sometimes doing something in the past will affect the world in the future. For example, in the Zora village the water is corrupted, and fixing it purifies the water in the future. There is some inconsistency with the rules of time travel. At one point, you must get a bomb flower from the future and take it back to the past to save the Goron Elder. After that, the Gorons plant the bomb flowers, which is why they were there in the future in the first place. There's a clear paradox here. The events you'll later go back to do in the past have already happened, but in the case of the Zora village, the water is polluted until you go back and purify it. I'm nitpicking, but I do have a personal gripe with this kind of writing in time travel stories. The time travel system plays almost identically to the Dark World in A Link to the Past. Despite the similarities, it's still an interesting mechanic which is utilised well. There's also a key difference in the execution. In A Link to the Past, you explore almost the entirety of the normal world before the Dark World is introduced. In Ages, you explore the two worlds simultaneously, leading to a lot more switching back and forth. Although the world of Ages is not huge, the past and present variations do help to get more out of the small space. Notably, there's no equivalent of Subrosia here, it's just a single overworld. The puzzle focus of this game is reflected in its world. There are more towns and NPCs throughout the world, and significantly less areas filled with enemies. The main obstacles to travel are puzzles and difficult terrain, rather than combat. The world of Ages also has a significant water area. As well as being able to swim, you also eventually gain the ability to dive underwater, which further opens up the map and allows access to new areas. These water areas help to give the world some identity. Exploration and collectibles work the same way as Seasons, with the main rewards being rings and pieces of heart. The rewards aren't too valuable since the combat is so easy, but the process of finding them is enjoyable. Oracle of Ages is full of puzzles. Instead of the puzzles being interspersed with the other elements to break up the gameplay, the puzzles make up the bulk of the game. There's a ton of interesting puzzles, many of which recur with increased difficulty and complexity. Some puzzles, like the floor tile switching puzzle, require careful planning and have punishing failure states. There's also some puzzles that require execution, like carefully aiming a seed and running to a specific point before it hits a switch. The puzzles in this game are all well designed. It's rare to find puzzles that can be brute forced or have unsatisfying solutions. That's important, because this is the closest Zelda has come to being a puzzle game. The dungeons in Ages have few enemies. It's not uncommon to go several rooms without a single combat. Dying is extremely rare in Ages. The dungeons have complex layouts, and navigating them can be a puzzle in of itself. The dungeon which most embodies this is Jabu Jabu's Belly. This dungeon has a water level switching mechanic similar to the Ocarina of Time Water Temple. Changing the water changes the entire dungeon layout. Figuring out where to go and at what water level took me a lot of time. Another interesting dungeon is the Mermaid Cave, a dungeon with both a past and present variant, where actions in the past change the layout in the present. The dungeon designs in Oracle of Ages are some of the most unique in 2D Zelda games to date. If you enjoy puzzle-focused dungeons, you will not be disappointed by this game. As you might expect, easier combat often means easier bosses. My favourite bosses are the ones that fully embrace the puzzle focus and involve little to no combat. One of the bosses is a puzzle gauntlet of increasing difficulty. This boss fight was the most memorable in the game. It's completely unique. When the bosses present interesting puzzles in this way, they're great. Unfortunately, many of the bosses are simple fights which fail to put up much of a challenge. As I mentioned earlier, the climactic boss fight against Ganon is fantastic. Similar to Oracle of Seasons, the story of this game is mostly set dressing. There is a greater sense of urgency and the villain is more active, but the story isn't all that interesting. The story also doesn't do much with the concept of time travel. Like Seasons, you're tasked with collecting essences to stop the big bad. It's not an awful story, but there's not much to talk about. I also don't have much to say about the music. The dungeon themes continue to be great, and I like how the past version of the overworld theme sounds more reminiscent of Zelda 1 rather than Link's Awakening. In general, I think the music is a little better in this game than Seasons, but the soundtracks are similar. Oracle of Ages is a solid Zelda game with a heavy focus on puzzles and little combat. There aren't any major flaws, but the game also doesn't distinguish itself from the rest of the series. Although in some ways the Oracle games are two halves of the same game, in other ways they have completely opposite designs. They're decent entries, but I felt they never reached the heights of A Link to the Past or Link's Awakening. Next time on the Evolution of Zelda, I'll be covering the Wind Waker on the GameCube. This is one of my personal favourites. I love a cel-shaded game. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you next time.